Hello again. This is week 4, video 3. We are moving into chapter 3, which is called socialization. And socialization is the one theme that we're going to talk about for the next half of this week and for part of week 5 also. Socialization is about learning our behavior, because one of the things that I told you about culture in part of week 3 when we started to learn about it, and at the beginning of week 4 in the first 2 videos, one of the things that I've shared with you about culture is that culture is learned. So all of those different components of culture, from language and symbols, knowledge, skills, traditions, customs, material, non-material, norms, values, go down that list that you have in your notes from week 3. All of those things are learned. When we are born into our social group, we don't know anything. We don't have a SIM card or some kind of Apple Store membership where we can download a backup of what our parents want us to know and behave like, because that's not how human beings work. We are a clean slate, and we have to begin at the beginning and learn all of the components of our behavior. Okay, so socialization is about our behavior within our social group. It is a lifelong learning process. Let me stop here before I get a little bit ahead of myself. Please look at the very, very sparse notes that I have on the board behind me. You need much more than this in your detailed notes that you should be taking during this lecture, because I do not have a nice pretty sentence or two written out here to explain to you what socialization is. There's a pretty sentence in your textbook about it that you can look at and copy if you want to, but do you see my face here? I'm kind of wrinkling up my nose a little bit. It would really be better if you can come up with your own words as a college-educated person to define what the socialization process is. So I am intentionally giving you very little on the board here, but just some key concepts and some key terms that you should have in a good definition of the socialization process. So, socialization is a lifelong learning process. Okay, I have the word lifelong, or the 2 words lifelong, listed here because it's important for sociologists to know that learning begins at the moment we are born. Some folks even believe or are of the impression that you can speak to an unborn child while they're still in the womb, and at least the voice recognition of the individual who's speaking is something that the child will be born knowing. The pattern or the cadence or the tone of that person's voice. Definitely, natal psychologists say that the mother's voice, the person who carried the child, the surrogate, and the mother who carried the child to term, definitely natal psychologists will tell you that babies recognize that individual's voice. So it's debatable about whether we're born knowing nothing, but it's not debatable to say that when we are born, our brains are not fully developed yet. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit in a future video about early childhood development, and that includes physiological development and the development of the brain, like they focus so heavily on in psychology classes. It's important for us as sociologists to understand that when new humans are born, we don't have our full brain function. The mechanics of the brain is not fully in place yet, and therefore adult thought processes and ideas, or a meter to tell us what's right or wrong, or our value system, knowledge about folkways, mores, and laws, all of those things that we've talked about in previous weeks, we don't know any of that yet. And for a significant period of our childhood, we are not capable of understanding the depth or the nuances of that kind of knowledge. Okay, so we will look in this chapter at a couple of just basic developmental psychology theories about what young human beings are competent or able to learn or process in their socialization process. but it's a lifelong learning process. But it's a unique learning process because it's not intentional always. Like this class that you're taking with me, this is intentional learning that's happening. I am intentionally giving you certain information that you are required to absorb and then reproduce things for me on a quiz, on a test, use it to evaluate something, apply it to certain case studies. Those are the kinds of things that I am intentionally teaching you in this kind of interaction. But the lifelong process of socialization includes every kind of social interaction, not just a formal, organized one like you and I are experiencing right now, but all of the informal stuff. If you are a child who is too young to even produce language yet, if you're sitting in your baby playpen and the TV is on and you're hearing and seeing things on the TV, you are having social interaction, and you are learning stuff from that. When you observe others in the room speaking and interacting with each other, even if they're not talking to you, you are learning from that social interaction. So the socialization process does not mean, it's not referring to just visiting with folks or hanging out with your friends. The socialization process for sociology students, because you are getting a college education, you have to now use this word differently. It doesn't just mean visiting and hanging out with your friends. It means a lifelong learning process. And that learning process takes place through social interaction. But here's the catch. What do we learn? We learn what we see and experience every single day. So if the immediate social group that takes care of you in your early youth, if they speak Spanish, if they speak Russian, if they speak Portuguese, if they speak Mandarin, what language are you going to learn to speak? That language. And consequently, if, for instance, you are born into a household that produces meth and sells it for a living, then that's what you're going to see and think of as normal growing up, because there is no meter that we're born with that will tell you or me or the child what it is that is correct or good. I think I told you a story about a little girl who learned all those cuss words growing up, although I don't even know if you could technically call them cuss words because they weren't said in anger. They were just kind of like impolite or maybe low educated level words. I don't know how you would qualify them. But that little girl never knew that those were not socially acceptable in greater society because she never got a sanction, a negative sanction, to communicate to her that those words were inappropriate. So if a child gets positive sanctions for behavior, that child will learn that behavior as socially acceptable. If a child gets negative sanctions for a behavior, that child will eventually learn that that is not socially accepted behavior. But if that child sees behavior that socially is not acceptable, although the people around her that create life experience and create social interaction for that individual child, if those people do it as a matter of fact in their daily life, the child is not going to know the difference. The child is not going to have a SIM card available to them to know whether a behavior, an idea, a belief, a pattern that they're seeing is socially accepted across the norms of society or not socially accepted. Children don't know this. So it is incorrect to say that socialization is a lifelong learning process where a kid learns or individuals learn the norms of society. That's incorrect to say, because we are going to learn the behavior and the patterns that are around us every single day. That's what we're going to learn. So please read in general what the socialization process is. Also, remember cultural relativism and ethnocentrism, because they relate to this. There's lots of diversity in US culture. Some cultures don't have such diversity, but there's a ton of diversity in US culture. And that means that people grow up, maybe even across the street from us, with very different behavioral patterns, very different belief systems, very different ideologies, customs, traditions, etc. And therefore, we are very, very likely to experience ethnocentrism even in our own daily lives with our neighbors. Definitely, if we work with the general public, we are going to see a lot of diversity that can fire off those ethnocentric feelings. It's important to know that people learned to be that way because none of us are born with any kind of pre-programmed behavior in our brains or in our souls or however you want to qualify it. We learn everything. Okay, so the rest of chapter 3, when we talk about it, we're going to tie a whole bunch of cultural information in with it. But the theme of chapter 3 is socialization, and we're going to talk about how we learn, the ability we have for learning and comprehension in early life, our gender categories, and how we learn to act out gender roles and expectations in society. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in this chapter, and I'm looking forward to it. So watch again very soon. Bye.